Anyway, the party wakes up 3 days later in the town of Amur. The group finds the old man who was in the shipwreck and tells him what happened to Arya, but hey, if her death made you feel bad, here's some NPCs dancing to a song we play to cheer you up. We find out that long ago, 4 warriors of darkness came to the light world and saved it, and so because of that, our boat was chained down by some guy named Goldor. No, that's Goldar, not Goldor. Anyway, Goldor is afraid that we are the 4 supposed heroes that did so, and, not wanting us to steal his crystal, chained up our boat and took up residence past the bottomless marsh. Speaking of the heroes, 4 strange old guys show up and start to claim that they're the heroes of legends, but before anyone can do anything, they leave. That was odd. Anyway, talking with some of the other NPCs reveals that some lady named Delilah, who's currently in the town sewers, has access to something called the float shoes, which could be used to get past the marsh and get to Goldor's castle. However, due to the number of monsters that have shown up in the sewers recently, Amur's elder locked the place off so no one can get there. When we go to talk to the elder, he's hesitant about letting 4 strangers from out of town go into the sewers for no reason, but when the group reveals themselves to be the legendary Light Warriors, with proof of course, he's more willing. However, the 4 old guys show up and eavesdrop on the conversation, wanting to prove that it's really them who are the legendary warriors, and so they go down to the sewers to try and get the float shoes first. Still, the Elder unlocks the sewers for us, so we know where our next mission lies. In the meantime, we can get several weapons and armor pieces for the Thief and Knight classes, as well as check out our newest classes. We actually got 7 new classes, but some won't really become viable until later, so I'll explain each one as we use them. For now, the only 2 that are really any good are the Black Belt and Viking. The Black Belt is basically the master class from the first game, though now we have claw-like weapons to give him until his fists actually become usable. As for the Viking, he's going to be incredibly useful for the sewers, since most of his weapons are lightning elemental. He's basically a tank class like the Knight, though while the Knight can only equip swords, the Viking can only equip axes. The sewers are a short dungeon, with enemies that are mostly weak to lightning elemental attacks, so a good swing from the Viking's axes or a blast of Bolt 2 will send them packing. Since it's so short, let me take this time to discuss the dungeon design in this game. Most of the dungeons are actually pretty easy. Though they can be a bit long, it never feels like they resort to being labyrinth-like in design or feel like they're endurance tests. You can get through these dungeons just by playing normally and still find the treasures without it feeling like you had to balance between the 2. That's the good news. The bad news is that some of these dungeons can be pretty annoying with trying to find what a hidden path to treasure is, and what just a wall is. On top of that, there are actually quite a few enemies here that can hit pretty hard. Granted, healers make that pretty easy to deal with, but if you don't pay attention, it can be annoying. The worst part is there's no way to save anywhere besides the overworld. So, if you're not careful, the game can catch you by surprise, and if you die, you'll have to start back who knows where. This is why Heinz Castle can be annoying if you fight him and you're not prepared to beat him, because there's no way to leave the dungeon, and nowhere to save in case the worst happens. There are also no tents or cottages or the like, so the only way to heal up is to either do so in a town, or to use items or magic. This, as a result, means that you have to backtrack quite a ways if you're badly hurt before or after a dungeon, so you have to be cautious when you go through. Anyway, getting back to our story, we see the 4 old men being surrounded by monsters, so our heroes jump in to fight 8 goblins. Wow, that's just sad. Anyway, with the old men saved, they realize that we are the actual Warriors of Light and apologize for trying to take our glory. Continuing on, we get to the end of the sewers and say, "Hey there, Delilah! Can we have the float shoes, please? So she says sure and tosses them at us. But then one of the old men tells us to look out, and our group moves just in time to avoid being exploded. This woman is freaking insane! The old men convince her that we actually are the Warriors of Light, despite being just kids, so Delilah hands us the actual float shoes. We thank the old men before we leave the sewers and head to Goldor's mansion. Goldor's mansion is actually rather short. There's not really much to do here other than find some treasure and fight Goldor himself. All the treasure is located in one room, and all of it except for one item is golden swords. Unfortunately, golden swords are worthless as weapons, but they sell for pretty high amounts. The other item is the Dragon Claw, which is useful for our Black Belt. The Black Belt also has the ability to focus his power and build it up, unleashing the power on his next attack, so he's able to do quite a lot of damage. Of course, he also does a lot of damage on his own, so maybe save the build up for bosses. The only other thing I can think of about Goldor's Manor is that all the enemies are resistant to lightning attacks for some reason. I don't know, it doesn't make sense. Shouldn't gold be more conductive and thus make them weaker to electricity? Whatever. Once we reach Goldor himself, he says that we'll never get the crystal, and so he fights us. Goldor, however, is pretty pathetic, and so we deliver a fatal blow to him. But before he dies, he shatters the crystal, keeping us from being able to gain its power. Well, crap. Either way, he leaves behind the key that was chaining the Enterprise, so that's nifty. With the Enterprise freed, we can go out and explore some places. There are actually 2 places dedicated to giving items to us for 3 of our new classes. First is the village of Duster, where we can get items for the Bard and the Geomancer. The other is the village of Repleto, where we can get items for the Evokers, including specific spells. With that stuff, we can go exploring around the world. We fly over a castle and... Oh, come on! Welcome to Saronia, the kingdom who is currently engaging in a civil war with itself for no reason. This kingdom is divided into 4 towns that we can explore around to find some nice stuff. In one part of the kingdom, we find a house where we can get a fat chocobo for free. In another part of town is a giant tower with random encounters that goes up a few floors, and at the top is access to items for the Dragoon class. Anyone else feel like the game is trying to tell us something? Anyway, going into southwest Saronia, we can go into a pub where a young boy claiming to be Saronia's Prince Alice is being harassed. So we decide to fight the guys who are doing so. The Warriors of Light! Defenders of the Crystals! Saviors of the world! Getting into bar fights with strangers over people we don't even know! Anyway, Alice thanks us and says that he was kicked out of the castle by his father, though he doesn't even know why that's the case. We ask him if he can help us get back into the castle, and he agrees. Going past the soldiers, we go up to the castle gate and ask the men if we can go inside. They refuse since Alice was banned from the castle, but then they get told that the king wants to see Alice and the warriors, and that they'll stay in the night in the castle. While inside, Alice wants to know why his father would do all of this, and the warriors assure him that nothing is going to go wrong. Then in the middle of the night, the king comes into the room brandishing a knife. He's about to stab Alice, but stops. The king's advisor, Gigamith, tells him to go through with it. Suddenly, there's the sound of flesh being stabbed as the king stabbed himself. Turns out Gigamith was mind-controlling the king for some reason, but the king broke free. Remember, kids, you can't force someone to do something they don't want if they're under mind control. Anyway, the advisor gets ready to kill Alice, but our heroes offer to protect him, as Gigamith reveals his true form, the demonic bird Garuda. And oh good lord, is this fight horrible! Garuda is easily the worst boss in the game, bar none. First, this thing is tanky as hell. It took quite a few hits for me to actually defeat it. But Garuda is also rather fast, and its attack is probably the worst part about it. This thing has only one attack, lightning. But this attack can hit everybody at once, and it hits for incredibly powerful lightning elemental damage. The only way to avoid this attack is to use the ability of the Dragoons. Jump. Jumping allows the Dragoon to basically become untargetable for one turn, and then the next turn they come down dealing double damage. By jumping and using either the Thunder or Wind Spears, preferably the Wind Spear, you can exploit Garuda's weakness to the wind element and deal quite a large chunk of damage. The problem is, your Dragoons might not be fast enough to avoid Garuda's lightning attack every time. So, before they go up, there's a chance that you'll get hit first. White mages will not help you in this fight. You practically need a full party of dragoons just to get through this one freaking fight! It's that bad! Needless to say, I died quite a few times. Either way, when we do kill Garuda, the king apologizes to his son about what he did, and Alice forgives him. And then the king dies. Jeez, this is starting to reach Final Fantasy II's level of body count. So, now that Alice is king, we need to find a way out of here. Fortunately, a group of engineers in Saronia happen to have a thank you gift for us in the form of a new airship, the Nautilus. This thing is ludicrously fast and is also impossible to control at times, but it is really fun to fly on. While doing so, we can find where to go next since there's a large canyon leading to a mansion. I should also talk about one of the new classes we've got that I used in my trip up the tower in Saronia, the Geomancer. Geomancers are an interesting class. Their gimmick is that they have unlimited magic and can cast spells whenever they want. But there's two catches. The first is that what ability they cast is dependent on where you are. For example, if you're underground, they'll create an earthquake that attacks everyone. Or, if you're somewhere up high, they'll create gusts of wind that slash at opponents. The other downside is that there is a slight chance that when you use a spell as a Geomancer, you'll end up backfiring and hurting yourself. This means that this can be pretty dangerous, but not unusable. Continuing through the canyon, which has random encounters sadly, we eventually come across a mansion. Inside the mansion, we are greeted by a new creature, Moogles! These cute little fluffy bear cats with bat wings and pom-poms on their heads got started in this game and have become the secondary mascot for the series after the Chocobos. Anyway, the Moogles greet us by asking who we are and wanting to know what's going on, but then they're told that we're good people by an old man named Doga. Doga has been expecting us, and this mansion is his home. He tells us that we are the only ones who can save the world from Xande, and explains a little more about what the hell Xande is doing all this for. See, Xande and Doga, along with a woman named Une, were both students of a powerful sage named Noah. When Noah died, he gave his 3 students each a gift. Doga was gifted with unlimited magic, thus becoming a master in magic of all kind, while Une was given the ability to travel to and from the Dream Realm. Xande's gift, on the other hand, was to be made mortal and live amongst humans in a normal life. Let me repeat that. Noah's gift to one of his students, the same student who it is revealed that was able to create the floating continent in the first place, was that he was allowed to die. Naturally, Xande took it incredibly badly and now wants to destroy the world. Wonderful work, Noah. Wonderful work. In order to stop Xande, we need to get the power of the final crystal, the Crystal of Earth. But wait a minute, didn't Goldor destroy it? Well, according to Doga, that wasn't the real crystal, but a crystal that Goldor had fabricated. He then says that in order to save the world, they'll need to get access to the Temple of Time. No, not that Temple of Time! The problem is that we can't actually get to the Temple of Time since it's underwater, so Doga joins the party and has us go through the Cave of the Seal in order for him to give us a way to do so. The Cave of the Circle is short, but it's also a pain in the ass. There's a lot of physically strong enemies, and just like with the Nepto Temple, we need to stay small the entire time. This means that Geomancers are once again helpful because this dungeon gives them the Wind Slash ability, and most enemies here are weak to wind. Once we're through, Doga chants a spell that makes the Nautilus able to become a submarine whenever we want, thus making the name make more sense. That's awesome! Meanwhile, Doga says he needs to go find something called the Eureka Key. In the meantime, while we can go to the Temple of Time, there's a few other places we can go to. With the Nautilus now a submarine, we effectively have a third overworld to explore. Underwater, the Nautilus moves slowly and we can encounter enemies, none of which are weak to any element, while also finding some secrets. For example, there's a village with a tiny lake near it surrounded by mountains which we can't pass. By going underwater, we can find a tunnel to the village. Inside is nothing but shops for almost every level of spell, except level 8. Then there's the Sunken Cave, a cave with some powerful monsters, but also some really good items that you can't get otherwise for a while. And hey look! They even put Ridley from Metroid in the game! There's another secret underwater that we can access, but in order to talk about it, I need to talk about the Evoker class. Evokers don't seem like very interesting classes when you look at them. They're magic classes, but they don't use black or white magic. Instead, they can perform a magic of a different kind. Summoning. There are 8 different summons in the game, 5 of which we can get in Repleto. Invokers can summon a Chocobo, which is pretty boring honestly, with a level 1 spell. Level 2 summoning magic gives them Shiva, the Ice Queen, who can damage enemies with her icy gaze, or put them to sleep with a cold spell. Level 3 gives us Rama, the Lightning Sage, who can paralyze enemies with his mind, or electrocute them with a thunderbolt. And yes, I pronounce it Rama, even though the proper pronunciation is supposed to be Ramu. But Rama is how I've said it for years, and I'm not going to change something that, let's be honest, doesn't really matter in the long run anyway. At level 4, we have Ifrit, the Fire Djinn, and if you're going to jump on me for this guy's name, please note that I've heard it pronounced many different ways by different people. I've heard Ifrit, Ifrit, and Ifrit, all of which seem viable. Anyway, Ifrit can heal us, or he can blast enemies with a ball of flame. And at level 5, we have Titan, the Earth Shaker, who can clobber or stomp on his enemies. Each of these abilities has a 50-50 chance of happening, and most of them are useless for now, but we haven't reached our full potential yet. Anyway, the final secret under the sea, insert your Little Mermaid jokes here, is the Saronia Catacombs. This dungeon is pretty big, but the enemies are pretty easy. But at the end, we fight the legendary warrior god himself, Odin. Odin is a pretty scary boss. He can do quite a lot of damage, but the thing you have to truly be fearful of is his main attack, Zentetsuken. Zentetsuken hits for massive damage, and it hits everyone in the party. But when you beat Odin, he becomes yours to summon as a spell. There's 2 more summons we can get, but I'm gonna hold off on getting them. For now, we need to head to the Temple of Time. The Temple of Time is a bit of a long trek, but nothing we can't really deal with. This dungeon is filled with Chimera mages who use the lightning attack Garuda had, but they're not nearly as bad as he was. Plus, the diamond armor pieces we've got from the sunken cave make some of the characters resistant to lightning. As I went through this, I actually used the other new class I've mentioned before, but haven't talked about yet, the Bard. The only other class that we don't really have any items for yet, much like when we had the Dragoon, so that's why I haven't discussed it yet. Anyway, Bards. Bards are actually better than you'd think. Sure, using a bard like a physical class would be stupid, but in this case, bards are actually more equivalent to their D&D versions. Bards have the ability to scare enemies or cheer allies. Scaring doesn't really do anything except lower an enemy's level, which is pretty much a moot point. But cheering buffs the ally party and makes their physical strikes more strong. The problem is that, much like scholars, they're very situational and don't really provide much. You can use them, don't get me wrong, but they're one of those classes where you're honestly just better off using another damage dealer instead. Once we get through the dungeon, we find Noah's lute, which we take with us to Une's shrine. There, we play the lute for Une and wake her up, taking her out of the dream realm. She tells us that, while we have done a good job so far, in order to truly save the world, we're going to need one more airship. She also hands us the Fire Fang and says that the new airship we're getting will be used to get the last of the Fang items. 3 guesses as to what that Fang will be, and the first 2 don't count. In order to get it, we need to head to Ancient Ruins, and oh boy do I have some choice words for that place! When we go through part of the Ancient Ruins, we find that the way is blocked by adamantite, but Une is able to break the adamantite with a stone from the Dream Realm. As we continue on the first floor, we find a mini base of operations with a weapon shop, an armor shop, and an inn. That's the good thing about this place. The bad is, well, everything else! This dungeon is very straightforward, so there's no need to worry about looking for stuff except on the floor right below the base. The problem? It's getting through this dungeon that sucks. Yep, this is a death dungeon, folks. This dungeon is home to one particular enemy of annoyance, the Azrael, a set of worm-like things. The problem is that these things have a chance to copy themselves and make another one with the same health as the last, and they can do this as many times as they want. They're only weak to one element, which is an element you can't even use yet, darkness. Everything else they resist, so you can't even blast them with magic to get through. These things take so freaking long to kill that at one point I had to kill around 80 of them in one fight just to move on. Needless to say, they pissed me off. Now, when I first went through this dungeon, I ended up encountering enemies that weren't even supposed to be in the ancient ruins, and it ended up making me have to start the process all over again. Seriously, I hated going through this dungeon. But you know what? It was all worth it for getting what is quite possibly the best airship in the game. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce you to the one and only Invincible! Seriously, this kaiju of an airship dwarfs the Nautilus, Enterprise, and that dinky little airship from the beginning of the game. And I mean kaiju of a ship quite literally because it rises out of the ocean like frickin' Godzilla. It's very slow, but that's a minor price to pay for what this thing can do. This thing has a high altitude mode that lets it fly over mountains as long as the range isn't too long. But that's not all. This thing is a freaking village in and of itself, complete with shops for weapons, armor, magic, and items, a bed that you can rest at to heal up, and a fat chocobo station. This thing is freaking amazing! And in addition, during fights in the air, the Invincible will get off the first shot every time, meaning you can't get ambushed when you're battling on this thing. With the Invincible, we can go get the final 2 unlockable summons now, both of which are on the floating continents. The first is in a little lake. That shadowy creature just so happens to be what we're going to be fighting. After going through a surprisingly lengthy dungeon, we come across a familiar face from the last game, Leviathan, the Water Serpent. And I gotta say, the guy's gotten quite a downgrade in size. I mean, before, he was able to swallow a whole freaking pirate ship and had a small village living in his stomach. Now, he looks like he might struggle to eat one of our heroes. Oh, but Leviathan's bite isn't what you have to worry about. Instead, you need to prepare for his deadly tsunami attack, which hits everyone and is considered non-elemental because water isn't a programmed element in this game. Besides, even if you were waterproof, I doubt a large destructive wave would really care. Chris was able to deal the killing blow after being the only one left alive and only having 100 HP. Now we just have one more summon to get. After going over some more mountains, we find ourselves in a small cave, and at the end, we come outside and fight the Dragon King himself, Bahamut. And he puts up a fight. Bahamut will only use one attack, Mega Flare, and it hurts like hell. This is incredibly powerful, and you are very likely to lose characters. Hell, I even did, and the only reason I was able to win was because Philip was a dragoon and kept jumping off of Bahamut's head while draining his life away with the blood spear. Yeah, the blood sword is back now, though it's not nearly as broken as before, and we have 2 new life-draining weapons, the Orichalcum dagger and the blood spear. Needless to say, Philip was freaking amazing, and with Bahamut defeated, we now have every summon in the game. Let's go get that last fang. In order to get the last fang, we need to stop by a small village that's once again on the other side of some mountains. The town of Folgabard is home to where you can get weapons and equipment for the last class we haven't mentioned, the Mystic Knight. Although in my opinion, I don't think the term Mystic Knight really fits what this class can do, honestly. I prefer the name of this class in the remakes, Dark Knight. That's what they are, honestly. Their gimmick is that they can only equip certain weapons and armor pieces, which makes them very limited, but they're pretty amazing in those limited situations because all of their weapons are dark elemental. Their power is insane, and the weapons that they can wield are just as powerful, including the secret weapon in this town, Kiku Ichimonji. I'm pretty sure I butchered the pronunciation of that name, but it's still amazingly powerful. Fun little Japanese fact, Kiku Ichimonji translates roughly to Chrysanthemum character, named so because the real Kiku Ichimonji was a name of swords with the imperial chrysanthemum Kiku symbol engraved on them, forged by 13 different blacksmiths in the 13th century in Japan. Isn't knowledge fun? Anyway, these will be important for the next dungeon we'll be going into. In the meantime, there's a cave in Folgabard where we can go into that will allow us to not only grind if we want, but also to get some cool additional stuff, and take a look at what we'll be dealing with in the next dungeon, the Cave of Shadows. The Cave of Shadows is a dungeon that's filled with enemies with a rather annoying gimmick. Every enemy, if attacked with a physical attack, will duplicate itself much like the Azrael enemies were able to do. However, if you attack with a Mystic Knight weapon, or magic, though these enemies are resistant to every other element except dark, they won't duplicate themselves. This is what I meant earlier by saying the game will force you to use certain classes. If you're not using a Mystic Knight, this particular dungeon is a lot more aggravating, so just save yourself the headache and use the Mystic Knight. If you think that you'll get a lot more experience from fighting these things, you really won't. You'll get plenty of gil, but that's no reason to make this harder on yourself. At the end of the dungeon, we find the boss, Hecatonk here. Pretty sure I butchered that pronunciation. And he is easy. Defeating him earns us the Earth Fang. From there, we can return to Doga's mansion, where he summons us to a mystical cave. At the end of it, he tells us that he is both the Eureka Key and the Circus Key. But we must defeat Doga and Une in order to activate the two keys. The party refuses, so Doga and Une don't really give us a choice. Instead, the two fight our heroes, and once again, Philip breaks the game by just jumping on them repeatedly. Unfortunately, I had to do this fight twice. After I won the first time, I switched Philip to a thief so he could escape from fights automatically, as thieves have the ability to make the party leave any fight they want, 100%, unless it's a fight that's impossible to run away from like a boss. Unfortunately, Philip ended up getting confused while also initially being in the back row and having high evasion. Because of this, the game was stuck in an endless loop because Philip wasn't able to get hit, which cures the confusion status, but I couldn't command him to do anything. Whoops. Well, second verse, same as the first. After killing Doga and Une, they say that their spirits will live on even if their physical forms die. It's actually kind of poetic that the two die like this. While in the ancient ruins, talking to Une reveals that Xande was lucky to be given mortality, and that both she and Doga saw the fact that they couldn't die as a curse. Well, we get the Circus and Eureka keys now, so we can finally get to the end of the game. After using the fangs to break the 4 barriers on the way to the final dungeon, we need to go through one more test, a mini-dungeon called the Ancient Labyrinth. It's a short one, but there are a lot of weapons to get for each class. But more importantly is that in the first room, you can finally find the Earth Crystal. However, the Earth Crystal is being controlled by Xande, and thus it attacks with Titan. I mean, he's already a summon. Oh well, I guess it makes sense since Titan's Earth Elemental. After defeating Titan, the Earth Crystal apologizes and bestows upon us 3 new jobs. The Devout, the Magus, and the Summoner. All of which are vast improvements over the White Mage, Black Mage, and Evoker, respectively. Granted, my party was pretty balanced enough that I didn't need to use the Magus, but the thought's still there. The big thing about Devout and Magus is that not only do they get more uses of spells, but they can also cast level 8 magic. But the big one for me is the Summoner. These guys can summon those same summons as the Evoker, but he gets far more powerful and iconic abilities out of the summons. The Chocobo can perform a Chocobo kick, which is pretty weak. Shiva can use Diamond Dust, where she rains shards of ice onto her opponents. Though it's actually weaker than her attack from the Evoker for some reason. Rama casts Judgment Bolt, bringing lightning down upon the enemies. Ifrit conjures Hellfire and runs through his enemies. Titan can use the Fury of the Land to create massive earthquakes that swallow all. Odin can use Zentetsuken, which has a 50% chance of doing nothing, or a 50% chance of killing all of the enemies instantly, unless it's a boss. Leviathan creates a tsunami to drown his foes and crush them with the power of the seas. And Bahamut uses Mega Flare, incinerating enemies no matter what element they resist or absorb. You know, summoners are pretty sick and twisted when you think about what they're doing. Anyway, once we're through the Labyrinth of the Ancients, we have one more challenge in our way, but we also have one more secret we can access. Going into the Crystal Tower, we gain access to the Forbidden Land of Eureka. As we make our way through these dungeons, we get access to powerful items, the Moonring Blade, Masamune, Excalibur, and the most powerful weapon of all in the game, Ragnarok. All of these are being guarded by palette swaps of other bosses, but they're so worth it. At the end, however, we fight one more boss and gain access to 2 final classes in the game, the Ninja and the Sage. And at this point, every other class in the game becomes pretty much worthless, because the Ninja and the Sage are the best physical and magical classes respectively. Ninjas are incredibly powerful and can equip any weapon or armor piece in the game, while sages can cast any spell in the game. But now, we can finally go through our final challenge. And it is by far the worst part about this game. The Crystal Tower is, by itself, an okay final dungeon. It's no different than any other dungeon in the game. The enemies are tough but fair, the place has several items, but most of them are along the way anyway, and it's pretty cool, especially design-wise. At the end of the dungeon, the group looks into a mirror and is thus afflicted by the curse of the 5 worms. Our heroes can't move, and the statues start their process of coming to life. Doga then acts quickly and goes to find 5 hearts of light to stop the curse. He visits Castle Sasane and recruits Princess Sarah, who still seems to be smitten with one of our heroes, and happily joins when she hears that they're in danger. Next, Doga goes to Kanan, where he recruits Sid to help the heroes. Then Doga goes to the Tower of Owen, where Desh hops out of the furnace after having finally fixed it. Turns out he was alive after all, who knew? After that, Doga appears in Saronia's throne room, getting Prince, or rather King Alice, to help save our heroes. And finally he goes to Amur. Because Arya is no longer alive, Doga recruits one of the old guys to help us. Looks like he gets to be a hero after all. The 5 stop the statues and free our heroes from being frozen. After that, they move on to fight Xande. And it's at this point that this final dungeon goes from okay to god-awful. First of all is the fact that Xande... he's not a good villain. I'll go over this more after the ending, but Xande is such an uninteresting and boring villain compared to not just other villains in the series, but to the first 2 villains in the series. Second, Xande may suck as a villain, but good lord is this guy a pain in the ass to fight! The biggest problem is that one of his spells is Meteo, a spell that no boss in this game should have access to. It hits everybody, and it hits hard. His other abilities aren't that threatening, but all it takes is one Meteo to wipe out your party. And since there are no save points, that means having to start over yet again. But that's not the worst part. Once you end up beating Xande, he dies, but not before revealing that he was actually being controlled by another villain that, up until this point, was never really brought up or stated anywhere, the Cloud of Darkness. Yep, Xande's not the real villain. Nice job with that, Cliché 3. Seriously, I know Xande sucked, but this is just a cop-out! Anyway, the Cloud of Darkness reveals that they are the ones behind all this. And yes, I'm referring to the Cloud of Darkness as they, since the DS remake and Dissidia, and I'm pretty sure the original Japanese script, had them speaking in the plural form of tense, which makes sense when you find out their backstory, which we'll get to soon enough. So yeah, despite looking like this, the Cloud of Darkness is not female. Anyway, the Cloud of Darkness says that they will bring about a flood of darkness to the world, so our heroes fight them. And she absolutely destroys them. But it's okay, because this is a scripted fight. After the heroes fall, their friends surround them to tell them to get up. Doga and Une then appear and sacrifice their spirits to make sure our heroes will live. And now it's time to take on the real final dungeon, the World of Darkness. Yes, this is the worst part about this dungeon. We had to go through a multi-floor dungeon, and it wasn't even the end. But the World of Darkness is awful for several reasons. So, first off, you can't go right after the Cloud of Darkness. You instead have to travel to and from and to, just to fight 4 bosses, all of which are really freaking annoying and can easily kill you. Second, there's 4 chests in this dungeon, each of which contains a ribbon, which is actually not a bad equip item for your mages, but each of these are guarded by Xande clones, which are annoying, but thankfully aren't as tough as the original Xande. But the worst part, and I mean the absolute worst part, is that if you die at all in this dungeon, you have to do the Crystal Tower sequence all over again. Yes, all over again, as in all over again, as in wiping anywhere in here means getting all the items, getting frozen by the mirror, seeing the others getting recruited, fighting Xande, dying to the Cloud of Darkness, and then getting resurrected, and then going through all of the World of Darkness, all over again! And unlike with the Chaos Temple from 1 or Castle Pandemonium from 2, there is no teleporting out! You have to beat this all in one sitting and hope that nothing goes wrong. You better be on your A game going into this dungeon because it is a long journey to get to the final boss. As you beat each of the 4 bosses guarding one of the 4 crystals, you begin to free the 4 Warriors of Darkness. They say that the world of darkness is a lot like the world of light, and that they're basically 2 sides of the same coin, but that if either light or dark gets powerful, the cloud of darkness will appear, sometimes as the cloud of light, and will basically try to use the power of the dominating force to return both worlds to the void, and that the only thing that can stop them is hope. So after beating Cerberus, Two-Headed Dragon, Echidna, and the infamous Ahriman, yes, that thing came from 3, we can finally challenge the Cloud of Darkness. They say that it's futile for us to fight them since their power makes them invincible, but the Warriors of Darkness then show up and state that they will undo that power, even though it will kill them in the process. The Warriors of Darkness sacrifice themselves, and so now we must fight. And honestly, the Cloud of Darkness is the toughest final boss from the original Famicom trilogy. One positive I will say is that the final boss music is awesome. I love how it's kind of a remix of the regular boss theme, but that's about all that I like about this fight. The Cloud of Darkness has only one attack that they ever use, Flare Wave. But the problem is that Flare Wave can hit from about 1200 to 2000 points of damage when your characters are likely in the 3000 HP range, meaning 2 to 3 hits are all that it takes. On top of that, they're also very tanky, having a whopping 45,000 HP. It took me several tries to finally put them down, but I did, and it was wonderful. After all that, our heroes escape the Dark Realm with their friends. We drop the old guy off at Amur, Alice goes back to being king, and Sid and Desh get dropped off at Canaan to be with the women they care about. But Princess Sarah doesn't want to go home. She wants to come with us, which I think is really sweet, but also kind of weird since I'm pretty sure she's older than the heroes. Oh well. We return to Earth, and everyone's happy, and the whole world is saved. The end. Ugh, what a pain! I'm really sad that the game had to end with such an annoying dungeon, because up until that point, I was actually enjoying Final Fantasy III for the most part. It's a good game. Not great, but good. The game's class system is easily the best part about it. Being able to switch around what you want your party to be is really fun, and trying to experiment with different combinations to see what you like best was great. Granted, this system has several balancing problems. Classes like Bards, Evokers, and Scholars are all really situational, while classes like Dragoons, Black Belts, and Devouts are almost broken in terms of how OP they are. The first few classes, save for the White Mage and Black Mage, aren't really viable once you get the second crystal, and even then, all the other classes are completely eclipsed by the Ninja and Sage at the end. But yes, the ride up to that point was really fun. The Invincible is an amazing airship, and it, combined with the Nautilus, made traversing the overworld a blast. I also like how everywhere you're going, you end up helping individual towns and cities with your problems. It's actually very episodic in a way, like reading through a novel or watching a TV show. Seriously, imagine FF3's story as a Netflix series or something. Actually, scratch that, because the story is not very good. 3's story is easily its biggest problem. There's several cliches that are used, like our heroes being orphaned, or people claiming to be the heroes when they're really not. Hell, we're still running around the world and collecting a treasure from each of the 4 classical elements, which is just as cliche in 1990 as it was in 1987. Now, it does subvert some cliches, like Princess Sarah actually being progressive when it comes to solving the curse from the Djinn, or Dash surviving the furnace. And I do like the fact that the NPCs do give you some world building by giving you backstory you might not otherwise get. But then there's Xande. Xande is a horrible villain. Compare him to the last 2 villains we had. Yes, Xande has more reason to be a villain, but he's not interesting. Garland was interesting because he defied logic by being able to become chaos through a 2,000-year time loop. Mateus was interesting because he always seemed to be at least one step ahead of the group, and he was able to become the ruler of hell. Xande is not interesting. All he is the stereotypical, if I can't live forever, then no one can live at all villain. Final Fantasy will use this trope later on in the series, but that villain is handled much better than Xande. Also, the whole villain sees mortality as a curse while others think it's a blessing cliche is just really overdone in fantasy, and I'm sick and tired of it being used. Seriously, writers who are watching this, if you are writing a villain for the love of all things good in the world, please stop using this writing cliche. It's not good. The Cloud of Darkness isn't that interesting either. They're just kind of a space fleet from nowhere. But I'm willing to give the Cloud of Darkness credit in that they're an interesting design, and their plan is, for the most part, unique. I can see why Square had them be the villain representative for Final Fantasy III over Xande when it came to Dissidia. So, now that we're done with the Famicom trilogy, what do I think of these games? Well, in terms of gameplay, 3 is the best and 2 is the worst. But in terms of story, 2 is the best and 3 is the worst. 1 is in the middle for both, but it does a good job of balancing them. If I had to say, I would consider 3 as the best game, but 1 has the best experience. Sure, 1 has death dungeons, as all RPGs do, but the dungeon design feels the most fair, even if they're annoying as hell, and 1 is still glitchy. Unlike the previous 2 games, I honestly wouldn't recommend checking out the remakes because they don't feel nearly as fun to me. The game instead replaces the 4 blank slate Onion Knights with named characters that have backstories, but they're pretty bland protagonists. There is an auto battle system, which is helpful in making things go by faster, but changing around your classes is annoying because you have to fight several battles with weakened stats that make the game a chore to play and discourages experimentation. But if you're not going to listen to me in that regard and you want to pick up a copy of 3 that you can own without going through emulation, I would recommend the Steam version over the iOS, PSP, and DS version. I would especially not buy the DS version at all, because all of the bonus content in that one is locked behind the Magnet system, which is no longer usable on the DS due to the DS servers all being shut down years ago. The PSP version does let you hear the original 8-bit tracks, but the remix songs aren't bad. 3 was a really well put together game. It was pretty fun. It certainly got fans' attention, and it would become the baseline for later games in the franchise. As I said at the start, the game never came out in the West until 2006, with Europe not getting it until 2007 due to all the stuff they jam-packed into there, so for the longest time, the game was considered the lost Final Fantasy. And since then, it's gained quite a note of popularity. But after the release of the game, Square began working on a far bigger and better project with a shiny new system, a lot more memory, and a growing base of fans. How well did that game turn out? Well, we'll talk about that game next time when we discuss the People of the Moon and the Dark Knight's Redemption in Final Fantasy IV.